Mark, we are live today on the Books4Guys podcast, and we're in the same city, just different areas.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, you too, man. Yeah, so both of us here in Nashville, we learned that about each other last week when we got to connect for a few minutes as we got introduced. But no, Mark, it's man, it's awesome to have you on today. It's interesting. I was looking at your background and former CIO of organizations like Okta, BMC Software, IHS. And then the last few years, you've transitioned into writing a couple books. And I was like, hey, I got to reach out to Mark and talk to him about these books that he's written and just kind of your story. So it's awesome to have you on today.
Well, when you're an author, your books are almost like your children. So if you like talking about your children, to being an author, you're equally interested in talking about your books for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're personal. You put a lot of work into them.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes more work than you put into having a child, right?
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, that kind of leads to me my first question. It sounds like, let me just ask, through your career and your work, did you ever think that you would write a book or let alone two books?
No, I think some people, I've talked to many people who aspire to write a book and it's kind of on their bucket list. They kind of want to get to it or whatever. And actually, in the first book, I kind of talk about this in the preface. It was almost more of a form of personal therapy, and I guess kind of what I mean by that is, at that point I'd worked in IT for probably over 20 years, and I had experience in a lot of different companies, and I just couldn't get over how we kept making the same mistakes like over and over again. And one of the phrases that always stuck with me was like, "You can't make some of this stuff up. When stuff goes wrong, it just happens." And I had actually kept a file of some of these incidents that had happened, kind of the more entertaining ones. So yeah, when I sat down and actually wrote the book, it was accomplished two things. My two goals were one was personal therapy because I
Yeah.
thought, and then the second one was to try to like help people that are coming up in their careers to not make the same mistakes over again. And maybe this is true in a lot of, career paths, but it's almost like the Matrix or Groundhog Day. Like people do this. Well, you see this with your kids. You try to give your kids advice, like, don't
Yeah.
hang out with those people. You should go to this school or like whatever. But then they don't pay any attention to you whatsoever. They go and do things that you would counsel them not to do. So that's was one of the other goals, was to try to help people not to benefit from my mistakes, to come clean
Yeah.
with my mistakes, and then hopefully they wouldn't repeat them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you worked in some of the most well-known organizations, especially, here in this country, got to see a lot and experience a lot and from each one and talk a little bit about so both books, you got Truth from the Trenches, which you wrote first while you were working at Okta, and then you wrote Truth from the Valley, which came out at an interesting time, right? Kind of during COVID, right before everything kind of hit. But you were telling me when we got connected last week, you kind of thought that Truth from the Trenches maybe still had a little bit more of a message that could resonate today. But talk a little bit about both books and kind of the messages that you were trying to put out there from each of those.
So the first one, Truth from the Trenches, talks about what, in my humble opinion, are the personal competencies that turn you into an effective IT leader.
Hmm.
And I've had several people who have told me, if you took that book and you just struck out IT and put in marketing, or struck out marketing and put in sales, they're kind of like some universal truths. And so it's very much a kind of a more personally focused diatribe about how to succeed. Second book is more about organizational competencies, like how you build an effective IT organization from a sort of a people and process and a technology point of view. And I think, Chris, when we chatted earlier, that book's the second book. Well, they're both older now, but the second book's discussion of technology is a little dated. You won't see any references to artificial intelligence, in that book, because it really predates. But the first two sections, I think, about people and process are still very relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and IT and technology are moving so fast. I was listening to a discussion the other day. I forgot who it was. Oh, it was NVIDIA's CEO. He was on Joe Rogan, but he was talking about how it's like 10x, whatever used to take 10 years, you compact that down to a year, or like it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. It gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for the same thing that you're doing today. And that's not the exact phrase he was using, but he was basically just saying like how much more you can do with less cost every so many years. So it's hard. I think anyone writing about technology, I mean, in 2 years, it's gonna be outdated. So, it's good that you have different aspects, though, to those books that you say can resonate, for longer term than just the
Yeah,
technology.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. What do you think, Mark? I was thinking about this the other day about like organizations. You talk about building a successful organization around certain things. How do you think with the speed of technology, and you were talking about like children, you give them a blueprint, but people are still gonna have to learn the hard way and they make mistakes before they figure it out. How do you balance trying to be innovative and moving quickly and making decisions instead of staying stagnant, but also, I guess, doing it the right way when you have a large organization and trying to get so many people going in the direction at the same time? I guess how do you just as you in your career, how do you balance a lot of that and get things moving, but in the right way and not so much pivoting all over and people not knowing, what you're wanting to accomplish? Does
Yeah.
that question
So
make sense?
yeah, it does. There's a lot of different levels to the question like that for sure. But I think in IT, sometimes, especially people that don't work maybe in large enterprises, sometimes I think they think a chief information officer kind of goes, up the mountain like Moses and has like an epiphany that says like, oh, we need to go to the cloud or like we need to do this thing with AI. And then you come down and like the great, pagan masses, you have to convert them to the cause. And like you just, you convert them and then you all march off into the sunset and you've leveraged technology in a way that's going to make the company successful. And I always tell people nothing could be farther from the truth because in point of fact, it's really hard for IT as a function to have significant business results without partnering with some business function, whether it's sales or supply chain or marketing or HR or finance, right? I mean, there's all kinds of technology opportunities in every one of those functional domains, but IT can't come in and tell HR how to run HR. Want to embrace some of the capabilities of new technologies. And so I think, one of the keys to success in those larger companies is, or any company, is you've got to have the kind of relationship with your executive peers where they respect your judgment and your insight and your perceptions. They don't, and they think your organization is sufficiently competent to actually go do something. Right? I mean, there's a lot of cases where your peers are equally enthusiastic about some new technology, but they look at the track record of the IT organization and they say, you know what, we need to get Accenture in here. We need to get Deloitte in here because we don't trust our own guys to be able to actually do this at the end of the day. So, again, we could explore this in a lot of different facets, but I think if you recognize that you've got to have those relationships with the other business leaders and you've got to find those partnering opportunities. You can bring the opportunity. You can say, well, here's this technology. And I visited company XYZ 2 months ago and they've jumped on this. And all of a sudden, the benefits that they're seeing are tremendous. And, we should explore this as well. We're kind of missing the boat. And that's been a realization. I think a lot of times, even IT people, early in their career, they think that the top IT guy just goes off and has like a seance and then comes back down to earth
Yeah.
informed of like what the right thing to do is.
Yeah. In your roles, obviously as CIO in some of these bigger organizations, did you also have a CTO there as well during your time?
Yes. Sometimes that would happen. Yeah. Yep.
And what's kind of the main difference of roles you have when you have both of those in an organization?
Right. Usually the CTO is focused on the products and services that the company is selling, right? And so the CTO helps, figure out like the product roadmap or the roadmap of what we're going to give to the paying customers. And then frequently the CTO will actually have the development organization that's going to build that product in some way. And the CIO is really managing the foundational IT resources that are used for day-to-day operations in the company. That's a very common division of effort of labor. Sometimes the two functions are combined, and when they are, the CTO title is probably used more broadly to cover both functions. But
Mhm.
where you do see the two roles, the CIO is really trying to make sure the company works, and the CTO has much more of a focus on product.
Gotcha. Yeah, because as you were talking about being like your peers and having those discussions, I think people forget your marketing has technology, you have security, you've got sales. There's so many tools for every division that you've got to look at and then kind of create this grand plan of what do we use, how do we do it, what correlates, where do we store information, how do we share it with everybody. Again, that's more than what my mind can handle. It's overload already just speaking that out loud. But how did you personally, I guess, manage those responsibilities, and how did you organize your day and year on how to make sure, I don't know, how you keep everybody happy, that's wanting this or wanting that?
So things have changed over the course of my career. I mean, when I started, there was a period of time for, well, historically, where all of those IT tools and capabilities were actually purchased through the IT function, right? Marketing would come to IT and say, we need help, or we found something. Will you go get this for us? And actually, in those days, also, the marketing people might go and buy something in the current fiscal year, but when we budget for the next year, it would get rolled into my budget, and then it would be something that I'd be responsible for. So, the explosion of cloud-based applications really changed all that. And so now the different departments very frequently go out and purchase tools that are specific to, their responsibilities. And to varying degrees, they inform or involve IT in it and those kind of decisions. And what I try to tell people, again, some of the folks coming up through the ranks, you know, we've got to kind of, from a management point of view, you have to move from a model of ownership where it's in my budget, I own it, I'm running it, I'll tell you what you can do with it, to one of stewardship. So you may not own the tool, but it's got to play nicely with all the other tools in the company. Data has to move in and out of that tool and maybe be used in some other kind of a function. What you talked about before, you've got the security concerns. You've got the deployment concerns. Are we going to access this on iPhones? Are we going to do it on laptops? Are we going to keep it, on desktops at corporate headquarters? How are we going to actually use this capability? so, so stewardship, I think, is a very important concept. If things go wrong, I think, and I know from experience, the CEO will look at you and say, how could you have allowed this to happen? And if you say, well, I didn't buy it, it's not my responsibility. They screwed it up. Don't come and look at me.
Yeah.
That's not a good job security answer. Like that's not probably going to enhance your job security. It's
Yeah.
like, well, you should have known about that. Like, how come you didn't look into that? Like, that's what we're paying you to go do. So, yeah. So when you say, when you ask the question about how to manage all those different components and piece parts, a lot of times, the functions know best. And just as a footnote to that comment, if you get into a company these days, it wouldn't be uncommon for there to be maybe 800 or more SaaS applications, cloud-based
Mhm.
applications that are being used. And there's no way that most IT organization doesn't have the competence to
Yeah.
really, know how to use those tools and administer those tools. Yeah, when people say, "Well, wouldn't you like to own it all?" My answer is like, "No, I don't, I don't know how I don't no, absolutely not."
Yeah, yeah. You can't be like an expert in every single thing that you're, which is interesting because, but, a lot of, I guess, broader employees, they look at the C level and they expect those individuals to have all the answers and to know everything. But when common sense comes into play and you're like, hey, they're doing their best too. They're trying to figure out the environment and what do we need to do here. And you're leaning on leaders in different groups, I'm sure, to relay information to you so you can make the best decision on what you need to do from a budget standpoint and every quarter and year. It's just interesting though of all those decisions. 'Cause I think of, like your role, I think of football coaches sometimes too, and they're
I do too.
everything, yeah, everything you've got to balance and keep in play. It's just intriguing to me on how you process and think of those things to, again, have and to make a decision. And sometimes it may not end up being the best, or sometimes it may. It's just you got to make the decision though, which is that's your responsibility. And thankfully I don't have to do that for a lot of things.
Well, like in a perfect world, that organization outside of IT, I keep coming back to marketing, but let's just use them again. So let's say they get interested in some kind of a customer engagement tool or a customer tracking tool or a campaign tool. In an ideal world, they would come to IT and say, we're really interested in Chris's product and it has these capabilities. And can you help us make a decision whether we should, if we partnered with them, they would, together we'd look at it and then we would say, well, you could buy that. And we understand functionally it's, it's great, But just realize there's like 3 knockoff effects of doing this, okay? Like there's 3 or 4 things you may not be aware you're buying yourself into these potential issues, but they may be lurking out there. Or again, like you can do that, but guess what? It's not going to play nicely with 2 other things that are important to your role. So we're going to have to like do some, plumbing behind the scenes to like get these things connected so you can actually get the best use out of the tool. And it's always amazing to me. Well, it's not amazing. People get wowed by the capabilities. They run off and buy the tool. And then when it comes to actually plugging it into your other, the whole,
A lot to it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And then one more question, because I'm going to transition to your books a little bit here too. And and again, I look at like CIO, CTO, CFO. We're talking to sports again, but kind of like the coordinators under the head coach. When and you worked a few different places, did you work with some of the same people at each of your different stops? Because sometimes we see like CTO, CIO, they go from one to another, and like I'm always curious, like did someone pull them over there because they had a relationship and they enjoyed working, or what was kind of your thoughts when you took on a new role in a new company? What led you to make the decision to transition to those organizations?
So actually, my answer is no. I have never been brought in by like somebody that I worked for before.
Hmm.
That hasn't happened to me. My personal experience, has been more with recruiters, where recruiters would reach out, and I think a lot of times recruiters like to go find people that aren't looking for a job, that are like successfully doing something already. So then you get this call out of the blue, and then they make it sound very appealing, and then you go and it's always nice to be wanted too, right? You go in an interview, and these people are like, "Hey, you're great. I think you'd be great here. Why don't you come on over here?" And then
Yeah.
then you land, and then like in the first 2 months, it's like buying a house, right? And then you say, "They never told me about Chris, and they never told me like, well, in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. I took one job, and I show up like on a Monday, and the CEO said, "Oh, we're going to have a layoff at the company in the next 2 weeks, and like we're going to lay off people in IT. The list has already been made, and we didn't want to bring this up during the interview process because we thought it might affect your decision."
You
So
think?
and he said, like, in this, at least the employees will know, like, you didn't make the decision because you just kind of showed up the week it's going to happen. And I thought, well, yeah, but couldn't we just waited like 3 or 4 weeks more before I showed up? So that's an example of, when you get there, things can always be are frequently a little bit different than,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm just always interested, and as a recruiter, yes, I'm always looking for someone I'm always trying to pull somebody,
sure.
and those are the individuals you want, and it's tough sometimes, when you're happy where you're at, you've got to do a hard sell
It's true.
to see if you can get them. So it's interesting that you seem to have some good experiences for the most part,
Yes.
working with recruiters
I have
and
excellent, excellent experiences with
yeah,
recruiters.
that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I always say too, we don't know everything about the opportunity most of the time, but we know enough to be dangerous. The good ones, we'll put enough time in to get you the info that you're seeking to make an informed decision. So it's cool that you worked with some good recruiters out there. But Mark, what led you, your career kind of, I don't know if it's ended or not, but you've moved on to writing a couple books now. I guess what led you to transition into, I don't know, becoming a full-time author at this point, with your works? I mean, do you have intentions of working in that space again? Do you want to write another book at some point? What are your plans?
I appreciate that. So since my last job at Okta, I've really primarily been serving as an advisor to startup companies, and I work with several venture capital firms too. I help them in screening startups that want money, and also in coaching some of the portfolio companies that they've already invested in. So that's where I really spend most of my time. The writing is more of a sideline kind of for me at this stage. And I don't think I have a third book in me, but I do write a number of white papers. And so for the venture capitalist, if I see an opportunity area, I will write kind of a investment thesis or a business case for why I think they should invest some money in some new capability. With 2020 hindsight, I've written enough of these that I probably could collate them together into some kind of a book. I don't know if there's an audience for that or
Yeah.
not, but yeah.
Interesting, interesting. So the VCs bring you in to look over maybe who they're considering
Yes.
purchasing or investing in?
Yes. So they'll
Interesting.
say,
A lot of, like, startup technology type
yes.
companies, I'm
Yeah.
assuming?
Yeah.
Very cool, very
Yeah.
cool. I've always been interested in that space. There's a book I read, I can't remember what it was called, but it was also a Silicon Valley book where it was talking about like if you're going to create a startup, there was like a story to it about how this kid went about pitching his idea and going through that process, and it was just fascinating because I think it was written when a lot of companies were growing quickly and such, and it was kind of a joke like, oh, another pitch, but when I think of the book, I'll share it with you. I'm sure you've read it, honestly, after being in that space for so long and knowing that whole area. But what's your thoughts, Mark? Like, I've never been to Silicon Valley. I've never worked for a Meta or a Google or any of those. But just I don't know, what's your thoughts on that entire area in general? They have so much influence on the rest of our lives that we don't even think about. I mean, we've got Apple phones, we've got all this stuff that we use, but just I don't know, what's your vision, or what do you think that whole place is gonna be? I mean, are they just gonna continue to grow and grow and grow and have more and more influence, or are there gonna be other areas of the country that, I don't know, competes with Silicon Valley? Like, what's your thoughts on Silicon Valley in general?
So there's a unique confluence of capabilities there. And what are those? And so, you've got two fantastic universities in Stanford and Berkeley that turn out talent, attract talent. You've got a cluster, a huge concentration of venture capitalists. So you've got them kind of all in one place. And then, over time, there's a flywheel effect. So what I mean by that is people step forward and say, well, I've already successfully started two companies and I sold the first one for 300 million and I sold the second one for 700 million. And I got an idea for a third company. And of course, the VCs are like, this guy knows how to do it. Like,
Yeah.
like he's got a track record to do this. So there is kind of a flywheel effect of you combine those unique factors and and they just what you said, there's really no other place in the country. Now, New York City has actually got a fairly vibrant community. They've become very successful recently. There's more technology in the kind of the Baltimore, Washington, Virginia type area. And a lot of that's funded by the Defense Department and whatever, but there's still like a fair amount of stuff going on there. And then, of course, there's many other parts of the country that kind of sometimes they have like a niche that they're really good at. It could be like fintech or healthcare or
Yeah.
whatever. And in fact, closer to home. So here in Nashville, that we're kind of the one of the centers of the healthcare industry, and there's a number of startup companies here that focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting to see, I don't know, like, people's quick reactions after, like, a COVID event was like, "Hey, everyone's leaving California and you can do all this remotely." But then over the last couple of years, you've seen these companies out there start to bring people back, and people wanna be there. And it's almost like maybe they took a punch, had to change some things, but Silicon Valley is still Silicon Valley, and they're thriving and innovating better than ever. Now you've got, the AI organizations coming up, which is a whole new level experience before, but now they're battling for talent. It's just interesting to kinda see that rebound happen to where it's like, "No, California, even San Francisco, it's not dead. They're coming right
Yeah,
back."
yeah. I think the other point to be made is when you have that concentration of people, smart people doing innovative things that are excited about what they're doing, it's just like a compounding effect or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you and I could have an idea here in Nashville, and we could poke around, maybe meet some other people in Nashville, get on some Zoom calls with other people that we know. But when you're immersed in Silicon Valley, you're like cohabitating with, I don't know, like another 250,000 people that are doing that kind of stuff. And so there's a real synergy to that interaction that occurs, I mean, both formally, company to company, but personally, like going out to dinner or meeting other people. uh, and sometimes it's almost like too much ideation. And what I mean by that is like people like think of new ideas like all the time, but at some point you've got to grab on one and just put in the sweat to be able to turn it into a commercial enterprise at the end of the day. But it's just intellectually and emotionally, it's well, again, it's just a lot of smart, hardworking people that
Yeah.
are kind of shooting for the moon, like, and that kind of rubs off on you as well, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure just the energy of the idea and the excitement of building something, if you have a dream, that's a place to do it if you wanna go build and potentially have someone invest in you to make it happen, and that's what I hear, like, that's the place to be. If you wanna be in tech and innovative and build something, like, you just gotta be out there, and
Well,
It's
from a job security point of view as well. So, I mean, if I joined your company and I thought it was going to go places and you're doing great things, and I get there and either I don't like the people, I don't like the idea, I get excited by something else, there's the social network is such that I can start putting out feelers, right? And they
right.
actually have incentive programs where your company needs help, and you tell me as one of your employees, if you bring in one of your buddies or get him to, him or her to come in an interview, we'll give you 5 grand, or there'll be some kind of a monetary reward. So there's a lot more, I guess, the right word is like fluidity of career options. So people,
It
yeah.
is. Yeah. Interesting. Again, I've always enjoyed learning about, that area, and I've read Steve Jobs' book and all these others that are, and again, some of the investment books. It's fascinating to me. I'm not the smartest, most technical guru, so it's not probably a place that I would be, but I appreciate just that level of collaboration and talent in one area and just all the innovation that's come from it. I mean, you'd have a book this thicker, bigger of just the success failures too, but what's been created in that area and how much of an impact it's had. So I just find it super interesting and intriguing. But Mark, two more questions for you. So from your books, when someone picks it up to read it, I guess, what's a message you hope, or a bit of information you hope that somebody takes from either Truth from the Trenches or Truth from the Valley? What's something you hope someone takes away after they read one of those books?
So I think maybe the first book, again, I'm going to go back to the trenches one. And I think if you were I don't wanna limit it to IT again. I think if you are one of the in any functional area, we all go through a transition from coming out of school or getting some kind of training. You're an individual contributor, then if you want, you start moving up and taking on broader roles of one type or another. They could be broader technically, they could be managing people, etcetera. But I think in a way, the first book, if you felt either stalled in your career or you think people don't recognize your potential of things what you aspire to do in the future, no, I actually think that would be a pretty good kind of like self-analysis tool, because you could look at some of those competencies that I talked about earlier and say, like, am I really good at doing this? Like, am I good at giving feedback to people, or am I good at working with vendors, or am I good at this? And, if you can look in the mirror and be truthful with yourself, maybe like after you come out of a performance review where you go like, my career's not going anywhere here. Like, what's wrong? So maybe there'll be like one chapter or two chapters and you go, yeah, I hate to admit it, but he's kind of right. Like, I need
Yeah.
to get better at being able to do something like that. So
Yeah. Something you can talk to yourself about,
yeah,
you don't necessarily have to hear from someone else, but you can look at yourself from reading your book and take a lesson or two. I like that a lot. I learn a lot from reading. Again, that's kind of the whole purpose of this is how much you can learn and about yourself and how you can develop and become something, even greater than what you think just from, taking the blueprint from someone else or taking the lesson from someone else. Love that. Mark, last question for you. If someone, or I guess let me ask this because there's two parts to it.
sure.
What's a book or two that has had an impact on you personally or professionally that has meant a lot or has contributed a lot in your life? And then if I or anyone else were to ask you for a good book recommendation, what's a book you like to recommend to other people?
Those are both good questions. Good questions. I don't know if I'm going to give you a specific book, but I do enjoy reading biographies of other people. Like, and you said this before, like what you learn. So you might find this interesting. So when COVID hit, I've always had an interest in history, and I'm actually quite fascinated by British history. I mean, I'm fascinated by American history as well, but a lot of the way that our government is set up and the way we operate is pretty much copied off the way the British system was originally set up. I had read a couple of biographies of people like Winston Churchill and some of the early prime ministers that they had in the past. And when COVID hit and I didn't have that much to do, I thought, I'm going to read the biography of every British prime minister since 1721.
Yeah.
So I got all these books that I went through, and it was just an incredibly interesting story. It was a really by doing it continuously and watching how each one kind of reacted to the prior guy, and of course the king and queen were changing at the same time, and just
Yeah.
the whole dynamics of that. So I don't know if anybody else has the fortitude. Maybe we need another COVID crisis to read all those, but I did find like reading them sequentially, I think had a much bigger it was more insightful, and you could see how, again, things unfolded over time. So
Interesting.
that's not like a specific book, but it
Yeah, yeah,
was
yeah. No, but that's interesting. I've definitely never read those or probably learned enough about that myself. So that's something that I don't know, you probably sparked a little interest there for me to
yeah.
look a little deeper into.
And what's the second question was?
Yeah, if someone were to ask you for a good book recommendation, what's one maybe you've read recently or just one you've read maybe multiple times, but what's one that you would recommend to others if asked?
Again, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. I'm trying to think if there was a book recently that I really enjoyed. I hate to draw a blank on you, but no, nothing really kind of pops.
Hey, that's all right. Well, there's a lot of books. It's a hard question, that you read a lot and then you kind of remember what you read recently, and it's hard to think about maybe some of the other ones you've read a while ago where they've, had a big impact. But
Well, here I will. Okay, so now with 3 extra seconds, I will tell you that. So we talked about my interest in history, and I know a lot about Civil War history. I've toured a lot of the battlefields, etc. And my father fought in World War II. And last year in the summer, he was decorated at 3 different little villages in northwestern France. And so this was what been on my bucket list for a long time. I wanted to visit the villages where he got his, commendations, and so that's what we did last summer. I only introduced that to illustrate that I kind of have an interest in, World War II military history as well. So I actually picked up this book just on the fly about the Americans fighting their way up through Italy,
hmm,
and they actually did it in the winter, and they thought they could, they had finished up North Africa, they had come on to Sicily, and then they thought, well, listen, if we just fight our way like up the boot of Italy, we'll draw some of the German troops away from the Russians, and so the Russians will be happy. But when they started it, they already had a timetable to take troops and equipment away from the commander of the Italian campaign to get ready for D-Day. So, like, when he starts the battle, he already knows, like, hey, 30 days I'm going to lose these landing craft. Like, 60 days they're going to take like this regiment away from me or whatever. So he's on this like short fuse to, like, and they're in the mountains in the middle of winter fighting for like a mile at a time or 2 miles at a and this was just an area of total ignorance for me. I didn't really know anything about the campaign,
yeah,
and I really didn't realize how gruesome it was. And then the other aspect of this was the Italians basically flipped sides as the campaign started,
mm,
and the Germans decided that they were going to defend all these towns and villages, make it really hard. In point of fact, we, the Americans, did more to kind of destroy a lot of the towns and villages to, fight our way through the Germans. And so the irony is we're here as liberators, but between the bombing campaign and the tanks and the artillery, we pretty much destroyed your village. Well,
yeah. Interesting.
yeah.
Very interesting. That's creating some interest in me too. I admittedly I hadn't read a ton of history. My grandmother was a librarian, though. She was very interested in Civil War and all of the wars, but and she instilled a little interest in me. But as I've gotten more into reading and learning, biographies have been just in personal development. It's been a huge anchor for me. But I've started to gain more interest for different aspects of history, especially because I have friends who love it. They've always loved it, and they're always reading books and recommending. And for a while, I was never really interested, but the last 3 or 4 years, I've become a lot more interested. And those are some great recommendations for me personally, and I know for others too. That I'll certainly look a little deeper into, and I'm sure I'll go down a rabbit hole and learn some things. So now that you've got my mind going, but no, Mark, man, this has been it's been an honor to talk with you, and thank you for taking the time to do this. Because again, it's important to see people like yourself who have accomplished a lot and are still accomplishing a lot. And anyone interested in your books, you don't have to be in IT, like you said. You can replace it with marketing, sales, anything to learn a few things. And so, thank you for taking the time to write those books. And who knows, maybe one day you'll have, like you said, you've got enough white pages. You may put something together at some point. But it's been an honor and a pleasure to talk with you today, Mark.
Well, I'm going to flip the compliment in your direction too. I mean, I think we both have a healthy respect for books and what they can do. I think a lot of the success I've had in my career, I can attribute to writing and speaking skills that really were refined. I mean, tremendously refined through a continuing interest in like just reading. I mean, I know my vocabulary is much better off for having read as many books as I have. And I know a lot of people that really struggle writing. They've got like a psychological block. They just are fearful of having to even write like a 2-page memo or some kind of a thing. Again, I think in my particular case, the reading has really allowed me to get a lot of enjoyment out of writing as well. So I think those are key skills regardless of your profession, regardless of whether you're going to stay technical or go into management or whatever. So I think the reading pays a lot of dividends. And frankly, you and I briefly talked about this. There's people's attention span is so short these days, and the social media just kind of drives you to look at things so superficially that I think a lot of the interest in reading and the benefits of reading are being lost in the process. So, thank you for what you're doing to promote interest in books.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, hopefully this conversation will lead to somebody picking up either one of your books or one that you've recommended or something of interest that's been sparked. And so that's the goal. And I think this will help somebody out there. So appreciate it again, Mark. It's been an honor.
Okay, thank you.